What is the least known Disney conspiracy theory? Story 1. The voice of Snow White, Adriana Caselotti, couldn't work in movies or music after that movie. Anyone that tried to hire her to do any kind of recording was warned off by the Disney company because they wanted to ensure that kids didn't hear Snow White's voice anywhere else. Fun fact, she's the one saying, "Wherefore art thou Romeo?" during the Tin Man song in The Wizard of Oz, 1939. Fun fact to your fun fact, a lot of people hearing that line assume wherefore is just some kind of old way of saying where, like she hears him from the balcony but can find him and asks where he is. Wherefore actually meant something closer to why than where. She's saying, "Why must you be Romeo?" As in, why couldn't he be someone else? Because if he were, they could be together without worry of their family's feud. There are actually quite a few moments when Romeo's name is the only thing keeping the text from being perfect iambic pentameter. If his name were something like, say, Paris, there would be no problem. Of course, the first words Romeo and Juliet say to each other, when combined, make a perfect Shakespearean sonnet, instant poetry. Story 2. So, way back in the day, there was a Disney trailer park that housed the foreign workers from Epcot. The word was that the parties there were legendary. No comment on that, but the rumor was that not only was this allowed by management, but encouraged, the rationale being that it kept them on property and away from the locals and finding out just how bad their living and pay conditions were. I don't remember a trailer park, but I do remember a gated apartment complex that was on International Drive and Little Lake Bryan Parkway that housed all the international students who worked at WDW. I was invited to some parties there in the 90s that were pretty crazy. The security at the gate was right about who they let in, but we would sneak past them by either hiding in the trunks of cars or hopping the fence in the back. I guess that they have a new apartment complex called Flamingo Crossings Village off of the 429 now. Story 3, former cast member at Disneyland. People got the idea that we all had to wear shared underpants. This comes from the fact that characters have to wear shared underdressings. For example, leotards and bloomers and t-shirts and shorts. But someone took it into their heads that all cast members shared underwear. It was one of the more common questions that I got. That and the tunnels. Walt Disney World has underground passages. Disneyland does not, with the exception of a trash tunnel under Tomorrowland. Of course, the first words Romeo and Juliet say to each other, when combined, make a perfect Shakespearean sonnet, instant poetry. Story 4, I've never seen one, but there's a famous poster of Mickey, Goofy, and Donald sitting around a giant hookah, and it has the title, Ain't Gonna Work on Disney's Farm No More. It was rumored to have been created by a fired or otherwise unhappy illustrator in the mid 60s. It made its way into many SoCal head shops, but when Disney found out, they confiscated all the copies and sued the illustrator into the poor house. I worked in a comic shop in the 80s, and we had several comic artists that had seen one or two in private collections. Story 5, I worked at the Disney studio lot in Burbank a few years back. There were a lot of wild rumors about the tunnels that supposedly run beneath the lot. There is in fact one tunnel that goes between the old animation and camera buildings, and I walked through it all the time. It was built for animators to move their art between the two buildings without exposing it to the elements. I worked at the old NBC studios, now the Burbank studios, and they had a secret tunnel between buildings as well, for the same purpose. They also used it when any presidents or anyone else with Secret Service protection were guests on The Tonight Show. Story 6, that the Arizona State University mascot, Sparky the Sun Devil, is based on an unflattering likeness of Walt Dincy himself. Rumor has it that the animator responsible for the original conception of the mascot's appearance was a disgruntled former Disney employee who hated Walt Dincy. The only hard facts are that the animator formerly worked at Disney before working at Arizona State University, but people have speculated about it, mostly pointing to Sparky's teeth and mustache resembling Walt Disney. Of course, the first words Romeo and Juliet say to each other, when combined, make a perfect Shakespearean sonnet. Instant poetry. Story 7. This one actually happened. Prior to Tron Legacy's release, Disney actively made sure the first movie was pulled from everywhere they could. They took back any TV rights, pulled it from any digital services, there weren't that many at the time, and bought back DVD copies from major retailers. I'm not sure why they did this, other than maybe they worried if people watch the first one, they might be like, not sure I need to see the new one now. I'm guessing they wanted to market the movie based on nostalgia from your memories of the first movie rather than what it actually was. Story 8. Not a conspiracy, but a fact via IMDb. Harlan Ellison was briefly brought on as a scientific consultant on the film. He was fired on his first day before lunch was over because he pitched an animated porn movie starring Disney characters. Roy Edward Disney was sitting at the next table, heard everything, and had Ellison fired on the spot. Ellison insists he was simply joking, but others who were there say he was talking about it sincerely. Story 9. They made a movie called Frozen to try and bury the conspiracy theory that Walt Disney had his body cryogenically frozen. That way, when people Google Walt Disney Frozen, the search results would be about the movie instead. Story 10. Why can Goofy walk and talk? Pluto is kept on a lead. They're both dogs. I suspect that Mickey, Donald, and Goofy are exploiting that poor dog physically and mentally to make sure it never realizes its potential and rises up to me for the three of them. They're kind of a joke about this on the new ride, Mickey and Minnie's Runaway Railway. The beginning of the ride, your train car, is operated from Goofy, but he doesn't notice. So at the end of the ride, you reconnect with him, and he's finishing some complicated story. So for example, you reconnect to his train, and he say, and that's where I hid all of the gold. On of the lines you can get through is, he'll say, and that's why I wear pants. A Pluto doesn't. Story 11. My favorite is Donald Duck being a World War II vet. Donald is responsible for single-handedly taking an island from the Japanese, but the experience gave him serious PTSD, and that's why he acts the way he does. The Department of Defense officially issued him an honorable discharge in 1984, meaning he retired as well. It was canon that Donald Duck was a sailor, but the U.S. Naval Fleet, but not many people know he was also airborne, or a paramarine. That's entirely his gimmick from the Disney War propaganda videos. Being in the Marines at the time, meaning Donald Duck would have seen Pearl Harbor from the Hawaiian training videos all the way to the Doolittle raids, which is why he also knows how to fly a plane. In the event if the pilot gets shot dead, Donald Duck was an airman in the Pacific Theater and took over entire Japanese gun nests. Due to the time of the video, Commando Duck, the layout on the map, and very much the actual role Donald Duck was a paratrooper in Guadalcanal. It's safe to say that Donald Duck was a paratrooper serving the 11th Airborne Division in the Battle of Guadalcanal. Note only that he served in Guadalcanal, but the timing itself means that Donald Duck served in Midway, Coral Sea, Pearl Harbor, Papua New Guinea, and the Philippines, Palau, Okinawa, and based on the timing of the U.S. fleet naval movements, and as well as the history of the unit, Donald Duck probably saw some of the worst losses in U.S. history and slept under the constant nightmare of a Japanese air raid, death camps, jungle combat. It is also possible he saw combat in the Korean War since the same unit was posted for Korea, but because he wasn't discharged until 1984, it's safe to say he's been in combat until Vietnam. Donald Duck wasn't a reservist or a volunteer since he was drafted, so very much he fought all this mostly against his will. So it questions me why we would be there until discharged in 1984. Basically, There is proof that everything that the previous person said is 100% true by overlooking two videos: Commando Duck, Donald Duck versus Japan, and Donald Duck gets drafted, as the release timing of both videos would match up the which battled and what unit Donald Duck would have fought in canonly. Based on merit, he probably retired as a sergeant or E5 rank. I did too much research. Story 12. There's a line in Be Our Guest that specifies 10 years we've been rusting, meaning they've been enchanted for 10 years at that point. Chip is pretty clearly well under 10 when they break the spell and he becomes human, which means that either the spell also froze their ages in time, or the teapot version of Mrs. Potts both conceived a teacup child with who and what and gave birth at some point. Also, there was a cupboard full of teacup children that weren't given names that also appeared to be under Mrs. Potts's care. What's the deal with those kids? In the Disney Twisted Tales version, it's pretty much stated that the beast is the only enchanted one that's aging, while the servants aren't. It also says that the enchantress who cursed the beast is Belle's mother. Not a spoiler. It's established near the beginning, which the book does a good job of working into the story. Story 13, I think Scar would have definitely mated with Sarabhai and Nal. Think about it. Simba was gone for like 3 years. In Lion Prides, the lead male would breed with multiple lionesses to make sure his line is intact. Sarabhai was the previous queen, and Nal a prime choice as a young female. Scar for sure had ample opportunity to continue his line. Story 14. Marlin from Finding Nemo is delusional with grief. The barracuda ate his wife and every egg. Nemo is a hallucination that manifests his grief, and his journey to find Nemo is actually a metaphor for him finding himself again and traversing the stages of grief. Nemo means nobody in Latin. Captain Hook is actually the good guy in Peter Pan. He's trying to stop Peter from kidnapping more children. Meanwhile, Peter is keeping the lost boys and hostages as his own and gets upset if they ever bring up their old lives. Kai, the butler, confidant, and royal advisor in Arendelle, is actually a spy. Prince Hans of the Southern Isles knows how to manipulate Princess Anna far too easily and too quickly without inside help. For example, Kai most likely overheard Anna running down the halls and singing about shoving chocolates in her face. Later, Hans sings to Anna about chocolate fondue. Kai told Hans everything he would need to woo the naive girl who was desperate for love. It's especially odd that Hans says no one was getting anywhere with Elsa. A royal advisor would consult with Elsa about possible marital prospects, and an insider would be able to clue Hans in. Lastly, a royal advisor would also most likely be consulted about handling Hans's punishment, and to save his own skin and by silence, he allowed Hans to return home where he would basically face no justice. Story 15. Cobra Bubbles was assigned to Lilo and Nani because their parents were in the CIA. Why go driving in the rain? Because they had a meeting with an asset, a contact, or some development in an assignment. They were killed in the line of duty, hence a former agent is assigned to look out for them. But by who? Where in the Disney gallery do we find an assassin? One who has a history of making hits look like car accidents. Bucky Barnes, the Winter Soldier, killed Lilo's parents, and just like that, Lilo and Stitch joined the MCU. Story 16, Aladdin, takes place in a post-apocalyptic future. In one scene of Disney's Aladdin, Genie calls Al's clothes "so last century." Genie was trapped in the lamp for 10,000 years, so there is no way he could have known about the fashion trends that could have happened whilst he was in the lamp. This means the latest Genie could have been trapped in the lamp during the 3rd century. If he spent 10,000 years in the lamp, it is then at least 10,300 AD when he gets out. Aladdin takes place in the future, or to be more exact, a post-apocalyptic world where only Arabic and some Greek survive. So much time has passed that the name Arabia has been corrupted into Agrabah. The Islamic religion has atrophied to the point where there are no mosques, imams, or prayer mats, but people still give praise to Allah in moments of happiness. Amazing technological marvels left behind by the previous civilization, like flying carpets or genetically engineered parrots that can comprehend human speech instead of just mimicking it, are taken for granted by locals or considered magic. The genie proves this by making impressions of ancient, long dead celebrities such as Groucho Marx and Jack Nicholson. Story 17. I don't know if it's disturbing, but I've always thought it's weird that in Beauty and the Beast, Belle's dad is obsessed with inventing things, but he doesn't have a single invention in the entire house. Like, what's the point of being an inventor if you don't have any inventions? It's like if I said I'm a painter, but I don't own any paintbrushes. He's an inventor, just not a very good one, lol. He had inventions. They just didn't work as planned. The one he did finally get to work, he planned on entering into a fair, but got lost on his way to the fair and ended up as a prisoner at the Beast's castle. Story 18. Woody from Toy Story has suffered severe mental trauma and a psychotic break. Woody is a classic toy from the 50s, but he for some reason has no memory of this. He may have been Andy's father's favorite toy at that time, but then for some reason was packed away in a box as his owner grew up. In the 90s, Andy's mom was somewhat young looking. I speculate Andy's father may have married a younger woman and had 2 children with her. He would be significantly older, having lived in the 50s. At some point, he would give his son his old Woody doll from when he was a kid. We know the doll is an old family toy, as this was stated at the garage sale in Toy Story 2. Before the original Toy Story, Andy's father passes, being of older age than the mom. The move to a new house in that movie may have been the mother's way of trying to move on. Andy's father dying also explains Andy's attachment to Woody, the toy that was his now dead father's as a child. The toy with such sentimental value that even the mother wouldn't sell when offered cash. Even when he goes to college, he chooses to take Woody over any other toy. Toy Story 2 creates a precedent with Jessie that toys can suffer mental trauma from being in storage for extended periods of time. She had a full-blown panic at one point. Woody would have been packed away in a box for at least 30 years. 30 years of solitude and darkness, pondering why you were abandoned by the owner you loved, may have caused a psychotic break and made him completely forget who he was. Andy's father gives him Woody, and Woody immediately loves Andy. Subconsciously, he could be reminded of what the father was like as a child, and this would explain his fierce devotion to Andy throughout the series. Even in Toy Story 3, where all the toys, including Buzz, are ready to move on from Andy when they think he threw them away. Woody may not remember who he was, but given his experiences, it's ingrained in him to help other toys. He saves Buzz, the squeaking penguin, Jessie, Lotso, Forky, and is even willing to sacrifice his voice box to save Dolly in Toy Story 4. Woody's been through a lot. Story 19, Ariel's mother, was killed by Captain Hook and his crew. The mermaids and Peter Pan obviously have had some traumatic experiences with the pirates, and in The Little Mermaid, Ariel's mother is nowhere to be found. It's not a stretch to extrapolate that these movies could take place in the same universe, and if so, that Ariel's mother could have had a run-in with the Jolly Roger. That also could further explain Triton being so extremely protective. Story 20. If the beast shall find someone who falls in love with him, the spell shall be broken, but he won't have learned not to be a a-hole prince that's evil to people. Instead, he's free to gaslight and or trick some unsuspecting peasant girl into loving him, hopefully one that can't read, because then she'll find out he used to have his butler's kids murdered if his tea was served with the wrong amount of biscuits. Also, I shall punish his slaves and servants, for they must be evil if they haven't killed the bastard already, and taken over the kingdom, and formed a fledgling democracy, and verily their fate shall be tied to whether or not the prince gets some poontang or not. The Enchantress. Story 21. Tarzan is the secret younger brother of Anna and Elsa from Frozen theory. The theory suggests that when Elsa and Anna's parents were lost at sea, they actually survived and washed up on the shores of Africa. They built a treehouse, had a son named Tarzan, and were eventually killed by a leopard. The theory suggests that Tarzan is actually the younger brother of Elsa and Anna, making the events of both movies occur in the same universe. While this theory is intriguing, it has never been confirmed by Disney and is considered by many to be far-fetched and unlikely. Story 22. These ones aren't necessarily disturbing, but here we go. Sabora the leopard in Tarzan was not actually bad. Thumper is the several generations' great-grandfather to all other Disney rabbits post Bambi. Shere Khan and Kaa were the only good guys in the Jungle Book. All the other characters were the bad guys. Scar didn't actually exist. In Hercules, released 2 years before The Lion King, Hercules wears a lion pelt, and it's the pelt of Scar. Adding on to that, and this is unfortunately true, Scar's original name is actually Taka, which is the Swahili word for trash. Carl from Up died along with Ellie in the beginning, but his journey to Paradise Falls was his journey to heaven. Burr Fox from Song of the South is directly related to Nick Wilde from Zootopia. Both wear the same colored clothing. Judy Hopps and Brer Rabbit also wear the same clothing. After Judy leaves Zootopia and returns to the family farm, Merlin is the true connection to all true Disney animated movies. He is from The Sword in the Stone, which takes place over 6 centuries ago in England, but he has a proper globe. On this globe, it shows America, the continent, and says, not discovered until 1492. He also mentions numerous world locations, both seen and unseen, at that time. Kronk, from the Emperor's New Groove, and Kronk's New Groove, is apparently Jewish. Story 23 in Finding Nemo. Nemo is actually dead, and because of the trauma and grief that Marlin dealt with after having all his kids and wife eaten, he has a mental snap and he is delusional about Nemo still being alive. With a lucky fin, he believes Nemo is there. Everyone else knows he's not, but play along, because breaking Marlin's delusion has been proven dangerous and scary in the past. Dory is also someone who knows Nemo isn't there, but plays along too. And the whole kidnapping scenario is something made up from Marlin because he's remembering what happened and is reliving how he wasn't able to protect them all, so his mind made up that whole thing for a do-over. Story 24. I'm not big on many Disney theories, mostly because if you actually think about the content of the movies themselves, they can be rather disturbing on their own. Not to mention, if you compare the tales to their pre-Disney versions, many of the titular princesses were assaulted in the folk versions, or at least those written down, for example, and the folk tales we have evidence of involving real people aren't much better. Rebecca, nickname Pocahontas, birth name Amanut, was 11 when Jamestown was settled. John Smith around 28. Her actual wed, John Rolfe, married her at 17 while he was 29. Story 25. That Peter Pan is evil and kills the Lost Boys. Captain Hook is trying to save the Lost Boys by helping them become pirates once they hit puberty. Dr. Facilier from Princess and the Frog was a lost boy, and his mother is Mama Odie. Facilier learned voodoo before becoming a lost boy and joined Peter Pan in his childhood. They had a lot in common. Shadows that lived independently of their bodies, knowing magic, believing things to become true, etc. Facilier realizes who Pan is and that he's evil, so he escapes and seals Neverland with voodoo, destroying the second star after the Darlings, Wendy, John, and Michael, visit. Raymond the Firefly became the second star on the right after Facilier stepped on him. Facilier was trying to prevent Neverland from becoming accessible again, but failed. The timeline of events would be Mama Odie born in 1729, with Facilier being born by 1759. If he messed up and turned his dad into a snake, then fled the bayou for Neverland, he has a snake fang necklace. He would be the same age as his mom, became older. 1904 is when the Darlings went to Neverland. 1907 is when Tiana is born. At some point before 1926, Facilier destroyed the second star. April 25th, 1926, Naveen visits New Orleans. While Tiana is 19, Ray becomes the second star. The 1940s, during World War II, is when Return to Neverland takes place.